Want to give a quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much, as always, for supporting the channel. And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up reading 11/22/63 by Stephen King, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just right now. So I'm going to give this book a 3 out of 5. This was an interesting read for me because I loved certain portions of this book, and I really disliked certain portions of this book. So I feel like a 3 is a fair score to me that really averages my feelings throughout this book. So I want to go into depth about what I liked and didn't like about this, but before that, I want to give a little preface about why am I reading a Stephen King book. I've never read a Stephen King book before. I'm not a horror fan. I hate horror, quite frankly. It's not enjoyable to me. I'm a fantasy guy. But I started a Patreon account about a month ago now, and as part of that, on certain tiers, you can nominate a book for me to read. And it'll go into a raffle, and whatever wins, I will review and read that month. And a Stephen King book got inputted into the raffle, and I immediately thought, no, I'm not going to include this. It's not a fantasy book. But I looked it up, and it is in the fantasy realm, and apparently Stephen King does write some fantasy. And I should have known that, because I know he wrote The Dark Tower, which is well known in the fantasy community, and I plan on reading it in 2023. And I am planning on reading The Stand. I thought that was going to be my first Stephen King book, and I think I'm going to be reading that in January. But this book won, and so it's the first Stephen King book that I read. And so I do think I liked this book. A 3 out of 5 for me is not bad. It's lower than my average, but 3 out of 5 means that I kind of liked it. I dislike some portions too. So essentially what this book is about, and I don't think I'm giving any spoilers here. I'm sure this is, on the back of the book sort of thing. But this is a time jump kind of story. And I've been critical recently of time jump stories, but I thought this one solved a lot of my problems that I normally have with time jumps. Normally time jumps have this issue of not really explaining well what's going on with multiple timelines, and if there's a single timeline, how do you deal with multiple people and their memories? And this book kind of answered all of the plaguing questions that I normally have with these types of stories. So I liked that aspect of it. And loosely, I think what I can say about this book is that there's a man who finds out that he can access a portal back into 1958 in the same location that he goes into this portal. It's modern day story. I think it's like 2011 or so that is the modern day, but he goes back into the late 50s. And he can spend as much time as he wants there, and whenever he comes back through the portal, only 2 minutes have passed in real time. But he can still age. And so, if you've spent 30 years in the past, when you come back, you're going to be 30 years older. So there's limitations here. It's not like an infinite, lifeline here. And he gets assigned a task by the person who previously knew about this portal to go back and stop the Kennedy assassination. This person believes that because of the Kennedy assassination, there's a lot of negative things that happen throughout time, and the world would be a much better place if that event never happened. But the Kennedy assassination takes place in 1962. Or is it 62? Is that what the title of this book is? Yeah, 63. And so he has to wait 5 years in this other timeline for that to happen. And a series of interesting events happens where he's trying to solve other things to make the world better. He comes back multiple times, and it goes on from there. And I really digged that premise. That's very intriguing to me. And it set up such an amazing, really truly amazing first third of the book. I was hooked. Unfortunately, the next large portion of this book, all I can really say is that it meanders. It goes into an interesting, and I don't mean interesting in a good way, interesting in I'm interested in why you made this decision, relationship subplot that takes up a very large volume of this book. I'd say probably around 50% of this book goes off into almost like a slice of life story where the Kennedy assassination is years down the line, and this main character is kind of filling out his time. And I didn't love it. I didn't like it. I'm not a big fan of relationship plot lines, usually in my books. I can find them interesting if they're not, you know, the sole focus of the book. It can really amplify a good story for me. But, you know, overall, I would, when I look back on this book, I'm always going to remember that the main portion of the story was a relationship story. And this whole time jump assassination thing was an afterthought. And that's unfortunate because, you know, this whole thing about going to a portal and being able to go 2 minutes only in real time is very intriguing. And there's so many fun things that could have sprung from that point. And it just was a lot of missed potential for me, unfortunately. And it felt like, and I've never read a Stephen King novel before, so, you know, I'm probably wrong on this, but it felt like King had a page count in mind when he wrote this book and really wrote a lot of filler. And I hate that. You know, I'm not a big filler guy. I want things to happen. You know, I want my plot to go in interesting directions. And I say that as somebody who also likes, sometimes, a very slow plot. When it makes sense. When it really involves a lot of character development in a good way. When I can see where the plot is eventually marching towards. And it usually works better in longer series. So you can spend an enormous amount of time really setting the stage so that all the dominoes can get knocked down later. But in a standalone book, filler just doesn't work very well for me. Maybe it works well for other people, and I know it does, because when I initially said that I was going to read this book, all I heard was from people saying that this book is incredible. A lot of people told me it's one of their favorite books that they've ever read, and I can get that. I understand, you know, if you like the late 50s, early 60s, you know, time frame, this is a wonderful slice of life story. If you don't mind a relationship plot, this is a very good story. And if you also like these time jump mechanics, then it's an incredible story if all of these things can be mixed together. For me, it just missed the mark. And, you know, even the ending, and I do think that the book recovered when the plot really started to get back on track for me. But it also missed a little bit of potential. You know, it felt like we had so much going, and then it just kind of rushed along in the last 50 or so pages, when I wish that that got really dragged out a lot longer and really got to feel the impact of this monumental event which was going to take place. I will say, though, that the very end of the story, the things that took place after this assassination attempt was very interesting. I loved the repercussions for what this did in modern day. I liked what happened, and I won't ruin anything, with some of the characters in this story and their eventual fates. I thought it was very fitting for this story, and I wish I could say more on what I mean by that. And if you want to talk spoilers about this, come on to the Discord channel. We'd had kind of a read-along going. There was 3 or 4 different people that were reading this at the same time. We were sharing thoughts. Come on down to the Discord. The link is down below. And I would love to talk more with you about some of these things in a lot more detail. I do want to take a second to say that, you know, I think that the characters themselves were written rather well. This is good character work. And I am left with a plot problem more than anything. And that's really my biggest criticism. I will also say that I am not turned off to King. I found a lot of his writing style to be very interesting to me. He wrote a lot of things that were really intriguing and fun, and I can see that he's a very, very smart man that can write some really good stuff. And I'm confident that I'm gonna like some of the other stuff that I have planned on reading. You know, what little I know about The Stand and hearing from people that I really trust, I'm quite confident that I'm gonna love that story. The Dark Tower, I hear so many conflicting things, but I can say that I'm very excited to read The Dark Tower. I think more so now than I was before. So very intrigued to read both of those stories, and maybe if I fall in love with those, I'm gonna say look, let me go back and try some of these other King books and see if maybe some of this horror genre really is for me, even though, you know, I haven't read much horror at all, but I will say that horror in movies, I hate it. It's not for me. So I'm assuming that's going to translate to book form as well, but who knows? You know, I'm no prophet. You know, I hope that it becomes a new thing for me, and I can find something that I love, because I love to read and I love to find more things that are interesting to me. And if a new kind of genre pops up that is new, then that's amazing. That's a huge volume of books that I can be intrigued on and read for many years to come. I did not listen to audiobook here, but I will say that this is one of those books that assuming that the narrator does a decent job with the way that they talk, and almost always a narrator does at least a passable job, the story itself would go well in audiobook format, because it's rather simple. You know, I find that audiobooks, you can very much get lost in the story, especially with these big epic fantasies. It can get complicated. You get too many characters, the plots get too sidetracked, and it's just impossible to try to follow along. Not so here. So if you're looking if any of these things interest you, about what I'm saying about this book, I would encourage you to check out the audiobook. Most of you know this by now, but I will say that if you want a free trial for Audible, I do have a sponsorship with Audible. Check out audibletrial.com/Matt. You can see the link down below, and you can get a free trial, which will get you a free book. So check this one out, and hopefully you like it. So I am going to end the review there. Thank you so much for checking this out. I appreciate it, and as always, happy reading to you. Thank you again to my patrons, and I want to give a special shout out to my Ascendant tier patrons, Danute, Sky, and Russell.